go around the south side of Mill Valley,
Yeah.
and then down toward it, which is a little bit on that. It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
This is where it's really.
If you keep going past Inspiration Point, go like to Redwood Flat, there's a hill that you go up, it's called Anglish Hill.
Yeah.
Isn't that a great one? I love that. Love that.
They do it every year in the Anglican language.
Yes.
Or English language.
Yes, and they did have that hill in it, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. When I first did an angle to English, it was fall of '79, and you were very young. They didn't come up that way. They went down to Full Valley, and then they came up to the road, they closed off the road, and had you come up from Full Valley. I was ready to be done with that. Well, happy Monday. How is everybody this Monday?
Everybody seems sedate and sleepy this Monday. Jeremy is in some sort of hypnagogic state right between sleep and reading. My son texted a link to something that I've seen going around on Facebook a few weeks back over the weekend. So it was a picture of Waldo with his striped shirt sitting in full lotus. And Waldo finds himself.
Yeah, plot twist of all the times. I saw that.
That was awesome. Indeed. That was a Waldo spirituality. How are you?
Good.
Excellent. Good to see you.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Let's pray and we'll be underway again. Father in heaven, on this drizzly day, pray that we will not be drizzly on the inside. We will be peaceful and warm and radiant on the inside. In Jesus' name, amen.
Get rid of this thing if you want. Distraction.
Okay. On Wednesday and on Friday, we did some math. And we're not even quite done with the math. Not even quite done. I'll just remind you, now I'm gonna be drawing over my drawing over here. We drew these out. Come on now. That chalk chart is shiny and ineffective. That's supposed to be a clock. Quite the artist. Okay, so we explained that whatever x plus whatever ax plus b, we explained that in our normal physical world, the world where we have breakfast and where we have to pick out what socks to wear, and where we have to wonder if there's enough gas in the car, and we have to be careful not to bump into things because it can hurt us, and we have to type on the computer, and all of those things that are sort of the normal, real things. taught can be evaluated scientifically. We can look at those things and we can measure them, or we can take a picture of them. We can sometimes duplicate them. It feels quite real when it's a physical object, when it's a noun, but when it's a verb, like running or walking, it's a process. It's a little fuzzier, but we could still watch it happen. We can still measure certain processes. We can measure things like movement. We can measure things like temperature, which temperature isn't a solid object kind of thing. Temperature isn't something that you can eat, but we understand that it's a characteristic of stuff that we consider very real. And if you doubt the reality of heat, then you can turn a stove on and sit on the stove and see, how very real it then seems to you. Because these are things that we can detect by our senses or by reasoning from the things that we do detect with our senses. We have established traditionally that there's only 5 senses. That's nonsense. It's a tradition, and a lot of traditions are nonsense. It used to be a tradition, and it used to be church canon law that spiders had 6 legs. And so we're proud of ourselves now in the 21st century that we're beyond that mumbo jumbo where you just agree something is a certain way because that's what the authorities say, or that's what we've said for a long time, and so we're used to it, and it's certainly better than what those other stupid other people are saying, because it's not what we say, so we know what's right, and they're icky people, so what they say doesn't carry any weight. But when someone's super not icky, when somebody's just powerfully unicky, they're really good folk, then sometimes we believe that the things that they say probably are more accurate than the things we even say ourselves. If I bring you quotes from Albert Einstein, you say, oh, did he say that? Oh, well, think about that then. If I bring you a quote from Stephen Hawking, you say, oh, well, that's that smart guy with Lou Gehrig's disease, sits in a wheelchair and talks through his old Macintosh. But we know that he's a really bright physicist, and he brought us, much to contribute to this Big Bang model and everything. When the right lab coat is worn by the right scientist, if you say the certain thing the certain way, then it could be something you and I have absolutely no direct access to, but we believe it. We think, yeah, that's probably true. I mean, they don't lie at Rutgers, for crying out loud. They don't lie over at Stanford. They lose their funding if they get caught lying. So if I say, well, Stanford physicists said to follow, and you're going, oh, okay, well, break out your ruler and go and check it for yourself. Good luck on that if they were using Stanford's particle accelerator. That's a real tough challenge. So you're forced to take some people's word for it. And here's the interesting thing. Over the weekend, people were marching for science. They're marching for science. Because it's somehow now, it's a team in the stadium, in the sport of what gets to be believed or paid for or whatever. But when there's a lot of people who were out marching for science who would love to consider themselves scientists, they don't do any science. They just believe scientists. They're just people who, that's the people they think are telling the truth instead of some other people who seem to disagree with them. They don't do any science, but they like to be associated with science. It's what it says on their jersey. It's, maybe they go to the game and sit and wonder why there's no team science down there on the field. But they're not scientists. But they think people who don't agree with scientists are stupid. And that might be true, but maybe not by virtue of just not agreeing with everything that scientists say. I fancy myself as somebody who is at least sort of familiar with what is being talked about when scientists speak, and I do some science in studying psychology, but mostly what I do, even in psychology, is theoretical. I'm not really an experimentalist. I've enjoyed taking physics courses. I've enjoyed conducting a few studies. And in psychology, though, I actually find it more interesting to sort of do the philosophical, theoretical side of things. Now, there's a big difference between being an experimentalist and being a theoretician. I can describe for you all kinds of other people's studies, and then I can say, do you realize what that means when I tell you this thing? I can say that the oxytocin vasopressin receptor complex in the parts of the brain, especially like the medial prefrontal cortex and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, that's really significant for prosocial behavior. And I can tell you about 50 articles that people have carefully had reviewed, and I can tell you what that adds up to. I can say, do you realize that might mean yada yada? And you can go, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. But in doing so, I haven't collected any data. I'm just looking at other people's data. And then I can discuss what that might mean theoretically and suggest some things that other people, or me later, might do for actual experiments. In religion, in the whole area of religion and spirituality, there's something very similar. You could have multiple degrees in theology. You could be a seminary professor. But all you're doing is taking everybody else's word for it. You've never conducted any of their research. Even if you've gone through the Bible and you've parsed every word in the Hebrew and the Greek and the little bit of Aramaic in the manuscripts, and you've evaluated every argument that's been made, and you know all about ecclesiology, you know the history of Christianity, you know the history of other religions and how they compare and what was going. You could lecture until people ran out of consciousness, but you've never actually done any of the things that those people you're reading, the things that they're reporting, ever did. You can tell me everywhere in the Bible that somebody that was dead got undead. And that doesn't mean to confuse like the dead with the undead as an adjective, because the undead, I guess, in zombie theory are different than just people who haven't died. So it's different to say not dead or the undead. However, when you get not dead, you've been dead and you come back, like Lazarus, like the widow's son at Nain, like the widow that Elijah helped out, like Jesus. You can talk all about that, but have you have you raised the dead? I'll answer that for you. Probably not. I might have heard about it if you had, unless you're very humble or very secretive. 2, have you ever seen anybody raise the dead? Well, I don't know what technically, from a scientific or clinical standpoint, I've raised the dead. As an EMT for 1,000 years, since any of you probably were born, most of you at least, I've had people at times that are in my care that are dead. Their heart's not beating and they're not getting fresh oxygen to the brain. And then CPR is effective. It usually isn't. It's hardly ever effective, but occasionally it is. And then, and then before I have gone back to the ambulance in the ER, you might even be conscious. So, that's in one way, and in fact, during most of human history, that would have been considered full-on raising the dead. Somebody was dead and had no heartbeat, for several minutes, and then you do some stuff, and and you breathe the breath of life into their nostrils, and then they become a living soul again. You've raised the dead. But the way that Jesus did, where he when we're not just talking about somebody who's like fresh dead, we're talking about somebody who's who's rancid, rotten, past rigor mortis dead, with decay and stench, and saying, Lazarus, come forth. And Lazarus comes forth. You get to unwrap him. Well, that's a different kind of raising the dead than the EMT kind of raising the dead. It's very different. But do you see the difference between being an expert in all the times people have claimed to do that, but you've never done it? You can also be an expert in the people who are experts in the times that I mean, that's what being sort of a scholar of the history of theology would be. You're an expert in the experts of people that have not actually done that, but have reported on people who claim to have seen somebody do it or heard from someone else that they saw somebody do it. It gets really remote. But Ellen White says that one thing that's lacking, and the one thing that we need to put into our program is experimental. You got that? Experimental religion. What does it mean, experiment? I'll go over here and see. I'll conduct an experiment. I'll keep my journal and see when I go to the Baptist church if it doesn't drive me up the wall like it does when I go to the Methodist church, like it does when I go to the Adventist church, when I go over to the Baha'i temple. We'll go, and then next week I'm going to go see if go to the Kingdom Hall, and if the Jehovah's Witnesses don't drive me up the wall, then I can stand it. That's not that kind of research I think she's talking about. She's talking about conducting spirituality experiments. Doesn't that sound a little bit risque, sort of from a church standpoint? A little risque? I mean, don't do anything, even by accident, that somebody who's not Adventist, who's spiritual, might be doing, or else you'll be in danger of some sort of apostasy. You could pretty soon be accidentally, if you go, okay, Lord, just picture if this actually happened. If you'd want to tell anybody about this, if you're an upright, upstanding, think you're going to get a job with the Adventist church kind of Adventist person, if you're in your home, in your own room, nobody's there, and you pray, you say, God, I'm open to whatever your Spirit does, and then you just try to not have intruding thoughts, and then all of a sudden, you sound like a Pentecostal, you're speaking in tongues. And you're going, what's happening here? Whoa. Okay, well, God, that one doesn't fly at my church, so what else you got? And so God says, well, go outside to the swimming pool and just walk right across it. And it doesn't even have a pool cover on it. It's got water in it and everything. Go out there and walk on it. So you go out there and you go, man, there better not be anyone looking. And you step out and you don't sing. And then you keep walking. And you go to the other side and you go, okay, that was bizarre. Would that be a spiritual experiment? If you heard God, or you thought you were hearing, I mean, how would you know if you heard God? If you heard God, how would you know you weren't manifesting it with your own mind? How would you really know? I mean, I've talked to people that are full-on schizophrenics. They hear voices. They even, some people even have visual hallucinations. And they can't tell the difference between me talking to them and the other person sitting there that I can't see and they can see. I mean, is that a matter of I'm blind to it, or they're interpolating their experience a little bit? What is that? Because we can make people blind to things. You can use hypnosis to make it so somebody can't see something that everybody else there can see. They see, there's the strange thing. They appear to be able to see through it. To be able to have, as if it's really not there, they have the full experience that they can see nothing there. You can do that with hypnosis. I mean, with people that aren't mentally ill. And you can see things that other people can't see. So you have to ask yourself, if the kinds of things that we verify scientifically, we verify with our senses, when you verify it and someone else can't see it but you can see it, and it's happening at the same time and you're in approximately the same place, what's real? man, if you were sitting someplace and everybody was watching you, and you were praying to God for an answer to something, and then all of a sudden, you, in your perception, are seeing and hearing somebody explain something, and nobody else that's there will verify it. Did it happen? Yes.
So sometimes I think of what you're saying is, I've thought about it a little bit, and it's almost like an electrical relay, you know what I mean? There's a connection that needs to happen, but it doesn't happen.
To be able to have those things occur?
Right, into that, maybe the sixth sense per se, the spiritual realm, you know what I mean?
We're gonna have to go further because the 5 is a silly number. We've got other senses that we all agree we have. They didn't get elected.
Right,
Popular vote.
but like, when Adam and Eve sinned, they had a straight up connection. God would show up, it would just fumigate them. I mean, you're just a very pleasant feeling,
Sure.
very pleasant atmosphere. Somehow that got altered after they sinned. Like, wouldn't you say that somewhat of a I don't know, like a real spirituality loss happened that day? Even though, like, the disciples, like Peter, walked on water, right?
Well,
Like,
you have to ask yourself, when you move past something in time, if it's lost, or if you just, that happened and now, when you got married, did you lose your girlfriend?
No. Evolved. I mean, that's why I say about the relay, is because I think the connections are.
I kind of didn't say which one.
No, I actually, I think things have got, like, you get confused. You think you've lost your girlfriend, and then all of a sudden you go to marriage counseling sense,
Somebody reminds you.
Hey, you need to, yeah.
So by that token, maybe you go to spiritual direction, and somebody says, "Are you sure you don't have that kind of connection?"
And I think Christ did that, right? The disciples raised the dead. I forgot which one, Peter and Paul, right? But that's according to scriptures, they did it.
I've talked to people here in England that have reported to me that they raised the dead someplace else since I've lived here. And I don't mean like the CPR kind of thing. I mean, I've done that in England. But I mean, they reported some, case where somebody was like, it was like the next day kind of body.
Yeah.
And so here's the thing. When you say that Adam and Eve had that in the garden and, before sin, all that, or these people who talked to me and told me when they were in the highlands of New Guinea that this child who drowned got revived, when they prayed, and the whole village is there, and they're not sure whether they're going to end up as like heroes or as cuisine if they don't get this one right. And when you and I, who have never seen that kind of resurrection in person, or we've never seen that kind of spiritual connection, or even if we had, we haven't seen Adam and Eve having it. We're taking a lot of people's word for things that have taken a lot of people's word for things that have taken a lot of people's word for things that have taken a lot of people's word for things. Now, that's probably part of the reason. I would put a little question mark on it instead of making it declarative. I'll just say probably. It might be part of the reason why people are a little bit nonplussed to hear, like, preachers say that you can have this glorious thing and there's power enough to raise up dead and there's power enough to cause things that are like magic. But you don't see any of it. You just have to trust people who are trusting people who are trusting people who are trusting people who read it in something that got translated 50 minutes. I think that might be why Ellen White is saying what we're not getting and we should be getting, what we're not seeing is actual experimental religion. We're reading books about things, but we're not having any direct experience with it. So Ellen White is actually asking us to use the scientific method, or part of it, in our spiritual experience. Experimental religion is not taking another class in the book of Acts. It's not hearing another sermon about a preacher who's excited that they went to some retreat and heard someone else tell about a way that they read about experiences in the Bible that were secondhand, that someone claimed to have, thousands of years ago. We should get at that. Instead of having another theology course or another religion course here, we should see if it's possible to take it into our own laboratory. Remember the passage, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good." Who says? What's good? I get a good feeling because I like the kind of music they do at the church. I get a good feeling because when I read the stuff, it gives me some hope because it points out some stuff I should be doing to treat other people better, and I'm determined to do it. I don't generally, but I determined that I probably will someday, and that makes me feel like less of an arse when I'm, taking account of myself as how good of a dude I am. But what would happen if we conducted personal, not like as a group, just and two people that are the regular God Squad flag wavers who are always going to have a testimony, come back and tell the rest of the class we did something? What if you could do something that would, so it would go, oh, check it, there's something there. And that's not all just nonsense. It's not all just something people say because they like to agree with each other at church. What if you conducted some sort of experiment? Unfortunately, I can't conduct it for you. I can't do magic. Well, I can do magic, but that's not spiritual magic. I can just do some card tricks and stuff. That doesn't mean it. That's not spiritual. It's just, well, it is psychological, but it's not the kind of spiritual we're talking about. But I can at least, and this is why our testimonies and our sermons and our Bibles and our theology are helpful, but it just gets so indirect. It just gets so, you're taking so many people's word that took so many people's word that took so many people's word for it. Like we do with science. So don't act like a scientist and act like you're all on their team, forgetting that you're having a lot of faith in what they say, and we routinely find that they were filling journals with horse manure so that they didn't lose grants. That the editors will refuse to look at people's well-vetted research, so you're never going to hear about it unless it fit the philosophy of whoever's funding the journal. So, yes.
That kind of reminds me of the prophets that are found in the Bible and how most people, there's like false prophets and true prophets. And you made a comment about schizophrenic people and how they can see things that other people can't.
Good point.
Can't you also say, like, in the Bible, the prophets are kind of like that as well, though?
Yeah, there's... Now, this is going to sound strange. When we get into prophecy, we're not even just talking about somebody saying, hey, look, I can see something you can't see. That's part of it. Like Ellen White talked about having a meeting right in her writing room, right here in Deer Park. If you haven't gone and toured the place and heard people that are the docents giving tours there, seeing reports of what happened right there in that building, you're missing out something that's really fascinating and that can really, even if you didn't believe it, just hearing the story can make the kind of shivers go up and down your spine. It's not a horror film. It's not an adventure. It's not fantasy. It's not Harry Potter. This is somebody claiming it really happened. But she claimed to see a young man standing there shaking his head when no one else could see him, when they were asking her to agree with some sort of business arrangement for publishing one of her books or some of her manuscripts. And they were there encouraging her to do this thing, and there was a well-dressed young man that she identified as an angel that stood just to the side of one of the men and saying, looking right at her and shaking his head, no, or its head. And so, but prophets also predict what's going to happen in the future. But whether or not it happens is not actually a criterion for whether that was really a prophet with prophecy. which is strange, because the Bible itself demonstrates that the prophecies are conditional. But it doesn't state them conditionally. The prophet doesn't always say, okay, unless this other thing happens, this might occur. Because any of us can do that. That doesn't prove any magical information. The prophets in the Bible will say, this is going to happen. And then when it doesn't happen, and they say, by this time, and then when it doesn't happen, then it is deemed conditional prophecy. That's a big construct, but prophets themselves will deem it that, and then later, people who accept them as prophets will. So, the scientific method is a tough one for that. However, most scientists or scientific fundamentalists today will accept that things in quantum mechanics that are probabilistic don't reliably happen, with some mechanistic, okay, you said it's going to happen, but it's saying, oh, it didn't happen. That's okay in quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics, believe it or not, when you take science so far that you investigate things, breaking them down into the smallest pieces possible, or the shortest periods of time, or the biggest amounts of matter collectively, or the fastest rates possible, speeds, velocities, the rules that we normally use for making sense and for being logical don't apply. They don't apply. When you get very fast, or you get very hot, or you get very cold, the rules no longer apply. You get to the point that you demonstrate the reality that matter itself, that stuff with substance, is actually an illusion, and it's actually comprising constituents that if you take them all apart and look at them, when you get them all to the smallest pieces, you realize they're not solid stuff. They're actually a happening. They're virtual. There is nowhere you can go, okay, I found, okay, this is, because you find the smallest piece of stuff, a quark, and if you were to reduce any of those, you don't get halves of quarks. You don't get 2 half quarks. You get energy. That's all that comes when you try to split a quark. You don't get 2 littler pieces of a quark, or you don't get what it's made out of, because it's not made out of stuff. It's made out of stuff that stuff does. We have a lot of illusions, and we have dichotomized, we forked out reality in our mind, and we've decided that the solid stuff that we believe actually occurs in the physical world, it's real regular, that it doesn't take any special privilege to see. Anybody could do it. You drop something and it falls. You apply a force, you can decide in advance what it's going to do, and it follows the rules quite nicely. But you've got this other stuff that doesn't, so we say, oh, that's all horse feathers, That's just nonsense. That's all just magic. That's stuff that religious people believe. That's stuff that fanatics and lunatics and psychos believe. Jesus demonstrated something to his disciples before he was crucified that Adventists, and this is an amazing spiritual practice that Adventists do. Most people that are religious today, even in Christianity, they don't do it. But Adventists, following Jesus' example, do something where they wash each other's feet before they have communion, before they have Eucharist, before they have the Lord's Supper. They wash each other's feet. Now, for some reason, it seems like Adventists are the most fastidious about their pedicures before when they know that it's going to be foot washing, they got to make sure that they and Dr. Scholes and Happy Nails have had a discussion on Friday, because you don't want anybody to see your, or touch your feet if they're nasty. You don't want nasty feet. No one takes nasty feet to an ordinance of humility, except the people that were actually the recipients of the ordinance of humility when Jesus did it. They've been walking in the street, and that doesn't mean that, I know we've heard that they all wear sandals and everything, so we picture them walking on the sidewalk with their Birkenstocks. But that's not how it was at all. The streets and byways were filled with feces and urine and dirt and filth, shook out diapers and emptied bedpans and donkey pee and all kinds of feces, human and otherwise, was out in the streets like a stream of muck. So when you come in out of walking in the street in towns like that, you would be covered over the ankles in sewage, in funk. And when you go in, before you do decent, polite things in the house, you clean that mess so that you don't have to bring it in with you. So there's still Asian cultures where the shoes you wear in the street, the realization that it's not like because you come in the house and you've done this on the mat, which makes about as much sense as the dog that pees and then does this on the cement. We do this on the, but some Asian cultures that take off their shoes and put on some house shoes because the funk from the street, it's not like it was back then, but it's still nasty. There can be like a flattened out, rotten, maggoty toad that you step on without knowing it. Your car tires go over that stuff and drive in the garage, and then you walk in the garage. And so, yuck. But their feet were full on like the diaper pail. And so when Jesus washed their feet, it was beyond going to Happy Nails and making sure that you had the right foot powder and that little spray of stuff before you go, because then people are going to see I hope they notice that I have purple toenails, It wasn't that. It was to say that there's no such thing as rank. There was rank odors there, but there's no such thing as like hierarchical rank. There's no such thing. It doesn't mean anything. And Jesus, it's not like, Jesus was proposing a new thing, and how absurd that there's no rank. He was saying, no. It's not just that it's his way. His way was pointing out the fact of the matter, that it's all a bunch of nonsense that we make up. And it's hurtful nonsense. That somebody is better than someone else. That somebody is sort of low enough importance or station or color or whatever that they should be taking care of the filthy things, while other people, you wouldn't even want them to know about it when they came to visit you because they're so important. He just was pulling the pants down on that. If we are to be humble, are to recognize also that we not only have no station like for status, we also have to be a lot more honest. And humility is about honesty, really. To be a lot more honest about what we really can know. We need to be more honest about when we think we've got it because it all fits together and makes sense, and we did the proof and it comes out and we turn it in and get 100%. We need to be a lot more humble about what that even means. Because there's nothing we do that isn't based on some presuppositions that are just our culture. They're not some fact of nature, because other people interpret nature differently and bring away with their senses different things from nature. So we need to be prepared. We need to be prepared to let go of how brilliant we think our time in history, in our part of the country, with our beautiful science that put some dudes on the moon. We need to recognize that there's a lot of bias, and that whole program only goes so far until it breaks down and demonstrates that it's a partial and flawed view too. Is it an important view? Yes. Does it point out truth about the universe? Absolutely. But it's not the truth about the universe. And if you are old enough, and you will, if you're lucky, you'll get to be old enough, where you've been reading science journals for several decades, you'll realize that the adamant, arrogant, loud-coded pronouncements of one day will always, in 20 years, be considered something that people look at and roll their eyes like, oh, well, shoot, can you believe what we thought 20 years ago? We have to recognize that today's pronouncements are in line for that process. The reason I belabor this is that without undoing some of this false confidence, you're not going to have any real results when you conduct your religious or spiritual experiments. Because there's elaborate mechanisms for just denying what's happening and for keeping, your brain will keep you from even having certain experiences when they don't actually fit with your concept of reality. You can't see it. You can make something up. For our group, we could have something occurring up here and then have something happen that's completely outside of your frame of reference, and it will be invisible to you. Think about the studies that were done where they have people watch a video of a basketball game, and they're asking you to count two things, I think. One is like how many times they shoot from the free throw line or something, or how many dribbles, but it doesn't matter what it is. But they gave them two cognitive tasks to be keeping track of on the whole play field there, court, to count this and also notice these. So people are watching the game to do that, and then in the video, a man a big man, in fact, in a big full-on gorilla costume comes out and is done in a bunch of horse maneuver right in the middle of the game and then goes right on out. And it was invisible to them. Didn't happen because their brain has learned the part of your visual processing center that gets, first of all, when you get photons that hit your retina, they get detected in certain ways, and then they get sent in the optic nerves to an optic chiasm where it divides out in some funny ways. It sends each eye, which goes across. They cross like this, like an X shape if you look at it from above. The nerves cross like this. They send, well, most of it. There's all kinds of guesses, but at least 2/3 of the stuff that comes from the right eye gets sent to the left brain, and the other third to the right brain, hemisphere, and vice versa. And then when it gets sent for pre-processing. You have no awareness at all of most of that kind of information. It goes to the occipital area in the visual pre-processing areas, where some of it then gets sent down to brainstem, bypassing that, gets to brainstem. So if you take in something that makes you have to go like this so you don't get hit with something, a board is falling or something, you don't have any awareness, your body is told to move without conscious choice. And then the part that then goes into the occipital visual areas there, they get processed according to kind of motion that's being seen, color and light and dark, and how dim and how bright, and angles and all kinds of pre-processing stuff they're not even aware of. And then it gets sent to an area after that to basically be checked to see if the theory that it's formed to present to your awareness on the movie screen that you have any access to in your conscious awareness, to see if it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, and it expressly is nonsense, then it gets discarded in error checking. You never have awareness of it at all. Then, if it makes sense, and it matches the stuff that came in from the other senses in an association area, then it gets sent along as a whole picture into your awareness experience, period. Now, do you realize in there that there's a step that's a hidden step that you and I can't have any access to? It's not visible to us. We're not aware of it. And that's that error checking. That's the thing that is responsible for the legends of tall ships coming into harbors, natural harbors in Caribbean islands. When Europeans arrived and people who had lived, they and their ancestors for centuries on these islands, stand and see no tall ships. Absolutely invisible. And then all of a sudden there's people rowing in smaller boats to shore, and you've got people group leaders that are standing there meeting these people, and they're pointing to the ship, and until their leaders point to the ship and point it out to them, which is looming and taking up a good percentage of the horizon in their visual field, they're seeing ocean and no ships. Their brain won't put it into their conscious awareness until there's some plausibility involved so that it can get past the error checking. So if we don't do that in here, you could actually be receiving information. It could be from God's self. But it won't go into your awareness because it gets zoned out as nonsense by your brain. So it's important to understand with the smart part of you, the part that has your sort of schema, your worldview, it's important that there's actually some sort of belief that this kind of stuff is even plausible in the real world, not in the world that, that we sort of socially talk about religiously, but kind of maybe that happened, maybe it wasn't, and you've heard all these explanations on Discovery Channel, and you've heard all these explanations on Nova, and you've heard all these explanations even in textbooks about why it is that the mythologies have caused stories to grow where people report things that of course didn't actually happen, like people coming back from the dead or walking on water and everything, and there's all kinds of textual explanations for it, and it's just enough to convince the smarter part of your brain that stuff didn't happen, unless you realize that stuff like that can happen, does happen, and will continue to happen just as real as the things that finally get vetted, much like our brain vets visual information, that get peer reviewed into readability, publication in scientific journals. Our brain is constantly doing the same thing that the scientific establishment is doing to make sure that stuff that fits and makes it so science doesn't look asinine to the world ever gets published. And our brain is protecting us from a bunch of nonsense that we spin out that really isn't accurate. That's why there's that error checking. Because there's errors. Because there's errors. Because otherwise you would be hallucinating all the time. And when the error checking thing stops working right, so that you just let everything through without any discretion or review according to your schema of what makes sense, then you are schizophrenic. That's what's happening when people have schizophrenia. It's not stopping the silly bad guesses about the data that's coming in, and it's even drawing from memory to make up new stuff, and it just lets it go right into your awareness, and then you're going, I wish it wouldn't do that. So we don't want to become psychotic and think that just everything that could possibly be perceived is factual reality, but we're going to have to recognize that those 4 dimensions are not all the dimensions in the universe. But our senses are only capable, and our cognitive processes are only capable of perceiving and reasoning in 4 dimensions. But we know that the universe doesn't make any sense, even to the hardcore math and science community, with 4 dimensions. You can't explain what we're seeing. It's all irrational unless we can have many more dimensions. Those dimensions contain vaster realities that cast shadows and that interface with our existence here. And until our construct believes this, you're not going to have the ability to perceive any information in conducting your spiritual awareness. I will see you on Wednesday and we'll talk more about that. Be ready for a quiz. Be ready for a quiz.
Something like